After way too much time invested, drawing, not great, but with about 3 or 4 more hours worth of work, I could probably turn it into something pretty good. So that's what I want y'all to realize is as you're looking at this, just think about how I was doing all the things we've talked about. As I was trying to erase, to bring out highlights, that pink pearl is just making big smudges, which is great when you're trying to get all of the highlights and shadows established, but it's not so good for putting highlights on little objects. I wish I had drawn just one little part of this, like even just the reflections in the curio cabinet. I think if I'd have just, made that into a drawing, it could have been pretty interesting. Or even just drawing the shelf, the objects on the shelf casting shadows across. The lamp was actually pretty cool. So there's several places in this drawing that could have been more interesting if I'd have just cropped it. But I committed to it and it is what it is. I also realized I never showed you the just object drawing using the rendering to create the object. I probably could have spent another 30 minutes to an hour blending the background, but it did what I wanted it to. It kind of sat back there. And what I'm just now realizing, because I haven't looked at this from a distance yet, my horizon line, which let me point that out to you real quick. My ground plane. Notice how my ground plane is not even. That's like one of those basic things that you've got to spot. What I could probably do is either bring the shadow down lower on this side, or I could just make a little bit of a highlight across there, and that'd probably balance it out. But if you look closely, you can tell that it's not matching up. And that's one of those things that diminishes our belief. I'm going to continually use the term, how believable is your drawing? And that just means, does the consistency of what we're seeing in a drawing actually add up to a kind of unified whole that we can believe in? It doesn't have to be perfectly real. It's just everything in it has to kind of match up so that we believe in your drawing. So what I want to do is give you a few more detailed ways of kind of making little things better in your drawings. The other day in the video, I alluded to the idea of using an eraser to draw with, and I realized that I just kind of thought y'all would see what I was doing and figure it out. What I'm going to do real quick here is just a little example of how you can establish the background with value, and then you can go back and use your eraser to draw with. You can do an entire drawing using this method, but you'll spend a lot of time just building up the surface. I don't do that very often. What I tend to do is basically just establish an area that I'm wanting to be darker. So what I would do then is just take my blending stump, and I'm going to make this into a sky. If I stop talking, it's because I'm trying to think about what I'm doing here. When I was working on that drawing, I realized how much better I draw when I'm not trying to record and be self-conscious of doing two things at once. Basically what I've done is just established a graphite ground. I've just created this surface that's been activated completely with graphite. But I want you to see, I'm just going to show y'all that you can actually draw with your eraser. If I was wanting to draw a light object against a dark background, I could actually use my eraser to do my gesture lines, as you can see. And then as you vary the pressure, what's nice is it's the reverse of actually doing shading with other media, because basically if I push lightly, I can get a real subtle fade. But if I push harder, I can get a really strong edge or a highlight. But I will go buy erasers just because you can actually draw. I don't have one handy here. Pretend like there's an eraser on this pencil. You can actually draw and do some really detailed work with the eraser on a pencil. If you practice using these materials, you can actually learn to do some interesting things, because notice how some of those marks are still there. So you can actually create some very subtle, mysterious images by establishing it and then just lightly blending it back in, things like that. But what I wanted to show you, I'm going to do my best with this eraser to draw a moon. Your drawing that's going to be due next Wednesday is going to be a creative drawing. It's going to be up to you to figure out how you want to approach this, but the theme is going to be Halloween. Two things are happening that when I was a little kid, I loved Halloween. I grew up, my family was very religious, but somehow my mom never deterred me from enjoying Halloween. And I remember the best Halloween as a child was a Friday night Halloween. And of course, the kids in our neighborhood were all into it. So this year is one of those extremely rare events. So we're having a blue moon, full moon on Halloween this year. I'm just hoping that the weather cooperates. So what I'm going to do is try to create a little bit of the glow of the moon, and then this is hard to do with graphite. This is one of those very painterly effects, but it's one of those things, if you just work at it, you can figure out your way to do it. What I'm going to do is try to very lightly get that blend of the glow and then reestablish the highlight of the moon a little bit more because I want it to kind of be definitive. I just thought this would be a good example for drawing with your eraser. What I want to do is try to get that edge as clean as possible just to give that sharp edge. So see how if I'm just lightly drawing, and you can draw with the blending stump. If you look at this, once your blending stump gets loaded up, you can actually create some pretty neat lines. Just to show you that this is not just a blending tool, it can be a drawing tool as well. So on here, what I'm wanting to do is just give those little places where I sharpen up the outline of the sphere of the moon. Two different materials you can use to add highlights, because I can sit here and erase and erase and erase, and I'm never going to get that paper all the way back to even if this was my 0, this is never going to be 0 again. And I want that moon to really be glowing. So this is one of those things that sometimes you just have to bring in a lighter material. So watch what I'm going to do. This got dirty, so what I did was just rubbed on the spare paper to just get this back down to a clean spot. This is a Conte pencil. I really like Conte because there's a little bit of wax to it. So when you put it on there, it pretty much stays where you put it. So think about how the moon is. It's got a texture to it. So this is another thing I wanted to talk about today. I'm not going to give you a long-winded example of texture. I just want you to know that when you do texture, just think of the nature of what you're drawing. So the moon, I know, has that surface. You don't have to go in here and draw every single, but I just want it to be that you know it's the moon, so I know that it's got that sort of cratered surface. So I'm just going to allude to how the craters would be, and maybe just give some of those craters a hint of an outline. So when you're creating texture, realize that you don't have to draw it with every single detail rendered and shaded. You just have to give us an illusion to how it would be. Just kind of tell us what that texture would be. Now this is the chalk. The chalk does not work very well with graphite. But the nice thing is if you can get it to build up, you can get these nice little sparkle effects. And that was actually a happy accident, because realize that sometimes when the chalk breaks, that new edge can make some really nice highlights. Now the problem is, once you add chalk, I don't recommend doing any more blending, because once you've got the chalk, it's just going to turn everything into this sort of cool gray, and it'll make your drawing look kind of smudged. What I could also do is go and spray this with some spray fixative, or even some cheap hairspray, and just let it dry. Now realize that cheap hairspray often has a lot of starches and maybe even sugars in it. So what that can do is turn a little bit of yellow over time. So I don't recommend using that on a, really good drawing. But if you're just doing an assignment for class and it just needs to look good for the, period of time to turn it in, don't hesitate to try using some. Now, one other thing to see is if you establish something like this, this is just a 4B. So what I'm going to do now is take my ebony pencil, because I want to maintain a consistency with graphite. But I want you to see how dark an ebony pencil can be. So if I wanted to come in here and draw some silhouetted trees, and realize this is pretty much a cheesy Halloween drawing, I want you to be creative. What I want you to look up, there's an artist named Caspar David Friedrich. He was a German romantic, basically a painter. And he did a lot of really beautiful drawings of nighttime with the moon and stuff like that. So the light's gonna kind of be back there, and then as things get closer, you make them darker. Now, I can't really do this because I didn't think ahead, but if you were drawing large enough and planning it out, you could actually put highlights on the edges of the tree to really make us feel like the light is bouncing around in there. Now see how I'm not going to sit there and draw every blade of grass. You just create a texture that tells us that that's a organic, grass surface. When you redraw an outline, we want that to not be an outline like a cartoon. And then when we shade it, we still see an outline. What we want to try to do from here on out, just because this is the official way to draw, make the boundary of an object as light as possible, and then make that simply be where the change in value happens between one object and another. Positive ground relationship. We don't want to see value that suddenly has a medium value that then has this dark outline around it. So from here on out, you're going to try to do your blending and rendering, whatever, up to that edge. But we don't want it to be that this and this are operating in a certain way, and then there's this, distinct outline that stands out. So what you want to do is just something to make that outline become part of this object, or maybe it becomes, if this is the object, let me blend that in so you can see it better. Use my eraser, give a little bit of reflective light so that it pops that out. So now this line, this strong outline I drew, is now going to be part of my background. So what I'm going to do is blend that into where that line is no longer a single line. It's just the boundary of that outline, the background. Start to understand how to enhance positive negative is think about how do you increase distinction of value. The greatest contrast of value is going to make things really stand out. So the lighter I make that against a darker background, the more it's going to stand out. Now watch this, if I can get this to stick there. See, that even makes it stand out even more. That's what I want you to think about on these drawings, is slowly start refining what you're doing, and try to come up with a creative drawing with the theme of Halloween. It doesn't have to be, monsters and stuff like that. Just come up with, what does Halloween kind of mean to you? What kind of a theme do you want to make? And then make a good drawing of it.